So hopefully those tips were useful in terms of helping you get more, both as I described, hard as well as soft outcomes. What I'm going to do now is to offer you some additional perspectives that I hope will help you drive more meaningful conversations, will help you and your colleagues get to the right decision makers about the right services and obviously at the right level of margin and profitability, and indeed the right size, going back to the note made before about revenues. When I reflect on some of the programs that we run and some of the work that we do with organizations, it always strikes me that even though people agree, they actually process and they are relatively competent in implementing some of those sales or negotiation approaches. Really, the difference is in how they conceive negotiation, in how they actually go about not just the tactics, but the mindset. So some of the discussion I would like to engage now in is not just about tactics, but fundamentally about the mindset and how you actually develop your own narrative, your own internal conversation about value, about customer satisfaction, about revenues, about deals, before you engage with the customer. There are 4 areas that I want to explore, and I would like to offer and invite you to do a set of activities to bring this to life. The first one is, how do you expand boundaries? How do you, as I used before, expand the pie before you start slicing the pie? How do you actually create more value across boundaries, across the Experian organization and the customer organization? The second one is about assuming that you will find yourselves negotiating in very different contexts, geographically, type of customers, different times in your sales cycle. How do you develop your signature approach? Going back to the question of your colleague, how do you actually push versus pull? How much assertiveness you bring into a conversation is the second thing I'd like to explore today. Third one, very often, when in negotiations, we have also discussed today, you want to focus on interest, but interests are not written. Very often, when you work with a decision-making unit, in other words, several individuals in the customer organization, there is no agreement as to what is priority. How do you actually focus on core interest? And the final one is going back to the dichotomy between sales and negotiation, how you create versus claim value, and how you integrate some of those processes in a way that are mutually reinforcing. Does this sound like meaningful topics to address in the next 34 minutes? Let's start with the first one. I'm going to put a set of words, and I'm going to ask you if you want to take a picture or to write them down, because I'm going to ask you in your tables to form groups of 3 or 4. So some of the tables have the right number. If you wouldn't mind, for just this exercise, if you have, for instance, 5 people, take one and next go to the other table. I'm going to invite you to form groups of 3 or 4 individuals. And then I'm going to ask you to choose some of these words. The best way to do this is by alphabetical order. So imagine that we have in a table, we have Adam and Gemma. So Adam, and then Steve and William. So Adam is the first one, alphabetically, and I would like Adam to choose the first 3 words, if you happen to be in a group of 4. And then Gemma, so Adam would take value, process, mutually, and then Gemma would take agreement, satisfies, unacceptable. If we go then, Steve would take interest, bargaining, and concessions, and William would take power, cost, and relationship. Okay? Have you all got these words here? I'll put them back, okay? And now, here is the activity. In those groups of 3 or 4, what I'm going to invite you to do is to use some of those cards or some of those keywords and use those keywords to form a definition of negotiation. So what I want you to do is to create your own definition of negotiation, and you can only use maximum 6 cards or keywords. Out of this list of 12, I want you to choose maximum 6. You can use prepositions, you can use conjunctions. So for instance, going back to the list, if you say negotiation is the process of creating value, so the of those words do not count. The only ones that count are the ones in the list. So far, so good? We get ourselves in groups of 3 or 4. We choose some of those words, and we try to come up with a definition of negotiation using maximum 6 of those words. And then, what I want you to do is, in your groups, you will have been assigned randomly to some of those words. I want you to persuade your colleagues to use your words. In other words, the winners of this exercise are those who manage to put all or the maximum number of cards into the definition. For instance, if we had William with power, cost, and relationship, you would argue that negotiation is about enhancing your power, right? And reducing the cost of the transaction and maintaining the relationship. So William may want to put those 3 words into the definition. It may be that Adam has, hang on a minute, but negotiation is also about a process of creating value. So William, or Adam in this case, will want those 3 words into the definition as well. So the game, the activity is to persuade, to negotiate with each other the inclusion of the words that have been assigned to you. Is this clear? So now, if I can ask you to get in groups of 3 or 4, assign your words, and in a minute, let's see if we can do this effectively, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to complete the exercise, okay? So we've got 3 and 3, we've got 4, 4, okay? We've got 4 colleagues, yes? Okay, so if you can then assign by name your words. And we're going to start, and we've got 5 minutes to create the definition of negotiation. Let's go. 90 seconds left. 90 seconds. If we can start concluding the definition, and I'm going to invite some of the groups to share their definition. Okay, who would like to share their definition of negotiation? Any group who would like to share their definition of negotiation?
So I've got negotiation is a process of bargaining which satisfies the interest of all parties to a mutually acceptable outcome or agreement.
Right. And we have 6 keywords, 7 I think. Okay, 6, excellent. Any other? Another definition of negotiation? Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously these are using the words I had, mostly.
Okay.
So process of agreement of costs that satisfies the power in the relationship.
Right, nice, succinct, straight to the point. Thank you. Another one? Negotiation is?
Negotiation is the process of mutual agreement that uses concessions to satisfy and achieve joint value.
Right. Another very interesting definition. Now, the question. Looking at the words that you have used, I'm going to ask, how many of you managed to get 3, if you had 3, if you were in a group of 4, or 4 cards into the definition? So I want to see the winners of this exercise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any other winners? No? Hands up if you only managed to put 2 if you had 3, or 3 if you had 4 cards into the definition. Okay, 2 or 3. 1 or 2 words. We are all friends. What happens here stays here. How many of you did not manage to get any of your words into the definition? Okay, so only a few. Right. Question, those of you who managed to persuade your colleagues, what have you won, apart from glory and pride? Nothing? Nothing tangible? Right? So would you negotiate for not getting something tangible? I want to ask you a question. What is the real purpose of this exercise? Was this exercise to win, to persuade your colleagues to use your words, to push them, allow me to use this word, to get yours? Or perhaps the exercise was really about how to build and how to construct the best and the most meaningful definition of negotiation. Was this exercise driven by what we call the self-serving or egocentric bias, or was this about the public good? I would argue that it's about the second. Moreover, if you think about instructions, it does say here in a slide, it does say 6. But think about the context where we are and who I am. I'm a professor. I'm an educator. So I'm not your boss. I'm not the president of the company or the CEO. I'm not the prime minister. And just because I said 6 and there was a number 6 in this slide, I'm curious about why you decided to self-impose this constraint. Moreover, I'm curious why nobody says, Javier, we are 4 colleagues here. We've got fantastic keywords. All of these words, would allow us to make a fantastic definition. For instance, negotiation is the process of agreeing a mutually satisfactory outcome that satisfies everybody's or both parties' interests. And you do that by bargaining, exchanging concessions, gain value, bond costs, and enabling the relationship in the future, or something along those lines. Because in negotiation, you won't be surprised if I said to you that each of these words actually count. But in this case, most of us assumed that there was a constraint. Nobody actually challenged. Nobody stretched the rules. What is the consequence of that? We may have suboptimal outcomes, only a few people. This exercise would have everybody winning if you had decided to constructively challenge some of these guidelines. Am I saying that everything is negotiable and that you have to go, when we finish and challenge everything? Absolutely not. There are things that are non-negotiable. The rule of law, regulation, compliance, and I would never negotiate if by negotiating an outcome, it causes detriment to the other party or is something unsafe or unethical. Therefore, if you do that, if what you are actually doing is not illegal, unethical, and unsafe, and it doesn't cause detriment to the other party, I would push to enhance the boundaries. I would actually push to try to redefine the negotiation so everybody can get more. Am I making sense? Negotiation starts from questioning the limits and the boundaries of value creation, and that's what best negotiators do. Second one, I'm going to invite you to do another short exercise. And this time, we're going to go back to dyads, and I want you to negotiate quickly in the following scenario. One of the parties, one of your colleagues, will take the client perspective, and the other one will take the supplier. It's irrelevant whether you take the client or the supplier. What I want you to do is to negotiate in no more than 4 minutes the following. I want you to come up to some form of agreement when there is a discrepancy or a dispute. The issue is the following. The client is, let's imagine, a fast-moving consumer goods company, someone like Nestle or Procter & Gamble or Unilever, and they acquired a company in the context of implementing a new CRM system, a customer management or customer relationship management software. This company is a new organization, and they had already agreed a 3 million contract with an IT vendor like Salesforce, Oracle, IBM, or any of these companies. And the work that you require to do is to take the database of the acquired company customer and bring it and integrate it with the existing CRM. You believe that this piece of work will take about 4 days, and it should cost around £3,000. Having discussed this with the vendor, with the IT vendor or the supplier, they have said, hang on a minute, we signed a contract with you, X PLC, but it's out of the scope to integrate the data from the company that you have just acquired. So it's not in our obligation. Second, if you want us to do this work, which we would, it's going to cost, and it's going to take 3 weeks, and it's going to cost around 15,000. No way we can do this reliably in 4 days at a cost of 3,000. Do you see the picture? So we have 2 positions, the client position and the supplier position. In your dyads, I'm going to give you 4 minutes to try to come up with an agreement of some kind between these 2. So one of you takes the supplier, one of you takes the client, and I want you to agree a way forward based on the limited information I have given you. So first thing we do is we get some dyads. Have you got a partner you can negotiate with? Yes? So 4 minutes to try to come to an agreement, please. 2 minutes left. 2 minutes. Thirty seconds. 30 seconds. Okay, so, can I have your attention, please? Can you put up your hand if you didn't reach an agreement yet and you would have needed more time? Okay? My experience is that if you double the time, very often, similar type of outcomes. Hands up if you have agreed to stick to the client position and the vendor has agreed to deliver this in 4 days at a cost of 3,000. No? 2 days, 1,000 pounds. This is, fabulous. How many of you have agreed, to actually deliver these, in 3 weeks and pay the vendor 15,000? No? How many of you have, agreed between 4 days and 1 week? Okay. How many of you have agreed, more than 1 week up to, the 3 weeks? And now looking at figures, so very wide range of variation, figures from 3,000 to 5,000, from 6,000 to 10,000, okay, and 11,000 or more. If you think about this very simple case, and you take the supplier position, and you said, well, hang on a minute, we should not be doing this. This was not part of our contract. You're right. But if you're the customer and say, hang on a minute, we are asking you, to deliver a piece of work, and we are prepared to pay 3,000 when we have actually engaged in a contract of 3 million. Shouldn't you be a little bit more flexible? And you are right. So it's not about the argument, it's about the position that you take. If you think about negotiation, most of us, and you have seen the wide variety of outcomes, people tend to adopt a position based on, first, the level of cooperativeness, in other words, how much concern you have for your own, for the other needs, versus assertiveness, how much concern you have for your own needs, interests, and approaches. This is a well-established model. Based on this, I work in a business school, so we always use 2x2 matrix. You have at least 4, possibly 5 areas, 5 approaches to negotiate. The first one, if you're not interested in fulfilling the other party's need, and neither yours, you are likely to avoid conflict. So this is about lose-lose, we don't do anything and we just carry on. Those who are focused on getting the best for themselves and not given to the party tend to adopt a competing style. Is I want to win, even that may mean that you lose. Then you have the opposite. You have the quadrant where there is a very strong intent to fulfill the other party's demands, not even at your cost. And that's the accommodating. As the word suggests, you accommodate and you offer concessions. On the top right quadrant, we have the collaboration, where you work hard to get what you want and also what the other party wants. And in the middle, you have the compromising style. If you think about there's no one way of negotiating, there is at least 5 different approaches you can take to negotiate. Question, which one is the best approach? Reflecting and thinking about your business, which one of these is the most effective one? None of them. It depends. That's a very academic answer. And of course, there's no one way. There are at least 5 different approaches. It depends, and it depends on what? Typically 2 things. First one is the significance of the deal, and second, the importance of the relationship. You're working with a new client. Now, they are a small company. They haven't got a lot of growth potential. Would you negotiate in a highly collaborative way? Possibly not. You would try to optimize the process and get your best deal quickly. You're working with a large a high street bank, a multi-country organization where you provide services across different service lines and so on. Would you approach that as a competing? No. If the size of the price is high and the value and the significance of the relationship is also important, you take a collaborative approach. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that in the way you develop your signature approach, you become what I sometimes call a 360-degree negotiator. You're able to be very tough, very assertive when the situation requires, but you also engage in a highly collaborative approach when the situation requires. There's no one way, there are at least 5 approaches, and the significance of the deal and the importance of the relationship should inform the approach that you take. Think about major conflicts and how we actually handle major events. This is a map of a region in the news every day today. And if you go back in time, there was a major breakthrough in September 1978. The key actors were Sadat, the Egyptian president, and the president of Israel. And then there was a third party, the US President Jimmy Carter, who brought them together to try to come up to an agreement. Following the 6-day war, Israel occupied the Sinai Peninsula, and that triggered a conflict with Egypt, and eventually got to a point where there was a high risk of escalation of this conflict across the region. So the parties were invited to Camp David in Maryland, and they spent 12 days in secret negotiations, very long days trying to come up to an agreement between the 2 parties. And none of them were prepared to compromise on any of the items. Israel wanted to continue controlling the Sinai Peninsula, and Egypt wanted to have the peninsula back to them. When the negotiations were about to reach an impasse, the mediators brought the 2 parties apart and asked them, Egypt, you've been working hard so far and no agreement is in the horizon. Can you tell us what it is that you really want? And to make the long story short, they said, for us, having the Sinai Peninsula is a question of pride and sovereignty. This is our land, and we want our flag to be on this territory. Okay, so what you're looking at is sovereignty and pride. They asked the same probing questions to the Israeli delegation. And they said, we want to control these because these will ensure safety and security of our population, and therefore we will continue controlling this land. They found that these apparent reconcilable interests actually had the potential to be made compatible. They brought the 2 parties together and put on the table a proposal. And the proposal was that the Sinai Peninsula would return to Egypt on condition that it would become demilitarized and there would be no weapons pointing at Israel. And on that day, they signed the Camp David Accords that then led to a peace treaty between the 2. If you think about in commercial negotiations, there will always be a situation where there is something that you want and something that the other party wants. The framing that you take may actually hold the key to unlock those negotiations. An example from the commercial world. We were asked by one of the top suppliers of Airbus to come and help them address some significant negotiations. This was in the context of developing a new aircraft a few years ago. We came in and we realized that there was a significant power balance. The reason was Airbus had sold to this particular supplier a major manufacturing facility. It was a 230 million transaction in Filton, near Bristol. And therefore, the supplier became much more powerful and started to try to bring more systematic approach to the commercial negotiations. Our initial conversations revealed that the top management of the organizations were quite aligned. There was mutual respect at a technical level between the aerospace engineers of the supplier and Airbus engineers, but the commercial function just couldn't work together. So I brought in a set of questions, and the first question that I asked is, what is the value that could be put at risk? They didn't know. So I said to them, you have to calculate the cost or the interim between cost and value in this relationship. We know that if your negotiation doesn't allow a fruitful relationship, there will be delays in the program, and airlines have very severe penalties to the aircraft manufacturers if the planes are delivered late. So we did a major piece of work over 3 months, and the figure was not millions, but billions that were at risk. Only at that time, we managed to get a process to put the two parties together. And what we did was, in a simple way, was to help them find the way to articulate and to trade off value, cost, and risk. If you think about the work that almost every supplier does for their customers, they are either helping the customer create more value by new offerings, new products. They are helping the customer optimize the costs, and fundamental to your business, they help the customers understand and contain risk. Is that correct? The key, therefore, in the way you negotiate is to help the other party find a proper and the right formula to trade off between value, cost, and risk. You can't have them all. It's how you compromise one versus the other what really makes a difference. It's almost like going back to our day-to-day life. Any of you have done a major house renovation? Yes? There are 3 things you can't have simultaneously. You can't have the quickest project, the highest spec and quality materials, and the lowest cost. Something has to go. You either go for lower quality materials or you extend the period, but you know that time, cost, and the quality cannot be met simultaneously. So therefore, one of the keys to focus on those things that actually matter, not just in terms of the negotiation itself, but also in terms of the process. A few years ago, I was faced with a challenge. This was before I was in academia. I used to be sales trainer in a major organization, and I had been working with the sales team across the region in top-line growth. So identifying the best opportunities and going for those opportunities. Something happened, and the price of one of our raw materials, which was linked to the price of oil, went up significantly, really pushing the operating cost of the company. And I still remember the day when the finance director came to my office and said, Javier, we need to put together a training program to enhance profitability, and we have to do it now. So what was my response? I can't do this. I've been training the sales force to go and focus on top line. I just can't shift from one way to another and focus on bottom line. But let me think about this, and I will come back to you with something I think could be done. And I found that in our context, we had in our organization a very valuable set of insights from our actual buyers. So I invited the head of procurement to come to the sales conference, some very similar event, and I invited him to provide a perspective on how we could achieve this profit margin in a way that was feasible and how we could evolve towards that model. The first thing that he said was how much he appreciated the work that the sales force does and how he believed genuinely that the capabilities and the approach that we took was world-class And he was comparing our sales force with the salespeople that typically visited him. Then he mingled and he came to the conference not just at the time, but he spent time with us, being seen as part of the sales community, even though he was from the purchasing department, typically the other side. He brought some options, not a direct approach, but some of the things that he believed people could do. So he was enhancing the level of autonomy. And he also looked at how you can actually look at the status and how buyer and seller relationships are not what we think. And he expressed how very often they, in the purchasing department, are subject and hostage to some suppliers and the power of balance. And the final one, he actually looked at how the work of the sales force could be made more meaningful. The final thing that he said was, just to give you a bit of context, in this organization, it was a chemical products. We were typically putting prices up by 1-2%, depending on the year. And on this particular occasion, we needed to push prices up to 15%. In my conversations with the procurement leader, he said that he didn't think 15 was not achievable, given that our suppliers were putting forward proposals to increase their prices to us by 25%. Going back to the anchor, if you think about 15% in the context of 25, so that year, in a half an hour, we managed to change the mindset of the sales force to actually focus on the core concerns of the customers and achieve not 50%, we managed to achieve a 12.5% price increase, which was 6 times what we had used to do. And the reason on how we did it was by focusing on key interests and key concerns of the individual. If I show you these verbs on these 2 columns, hands up, how many of you, would argue that the first column, enthuse, explain, persuade, justify, convince, qualify, rationalize, and ask, are the type of things that you would be doing in the sales process? Does this list look like a reasonable set of actions that you typically manifest when you're selling? Think about the second column. Listen, consider, question, state, think, control, wait and tell. Those are some of the action verbs that you typically see in negotiation. What I'm trying to say is that sales and negotiation, as I argued before, are quite intertwined, but they have slightly different nature. And you need to be mindful as to when you're selling versus when you're negotiating. Going back to, and this is the fourth one, when claiming and creating value, consider that even though they are quite tightly together, there is a time and a process to create value and a time and a process to claim value. Final insights, how do you do that? Well, if you think about some of the things that are in your mind, when you're actually working with customers, you will be thinking about reputation, compliance, risk, your targets, your margins, deadlines. This is the perspective that you take. I would be surprised if you asked your customers, those who you're interacting with, and asked about what are in the mind, what are the things that they are really looking forward, or the things that influence their thinking and action, and you will find very much the same. Some of your financial services customers will have exactly the same concerns in the way you work with them. So in negotiating, I would like to invite you to take their perspective to inform your approach to negotiate. So bringing things together, if you were to take 4 insights from the work that we've done in the last 45 minutes, the first one, I would like to invite you to relentlessly pursue expanding the pie, enhancing the ability to create more value, redefining the boundaries before you start slicing the pie or claiming value. Develop flexibility. You will have different types of customers. You will be having a portfolio of accounts, some of which are more strategic. Take a collaborative approach with those strategic accounts and be confident in taking a more competitive approach with those transactional accounts. Develop, therefore, that flexibility to become a 360 negotiator. Second or third, if you think about the core interest, simultaneously, you will be handling 2 things. One is the negotiation process and yourself as a negotiator. The best outcomes come from doing both. Understanding your psychological your emotional as well as your cognitive and behavioral elements, as well as what's happening on the other side. Very often we focus on the numbers at the cost of the emotions and the behaviors. Do both. And finally, don't sell when you're negotiating and don't negotiate when you're selling. Try to do both, one at a time. Thank you so much.